The air in the grand old St. Jude's Cathedral was thick with the scent of white lilies and unspoken grief. Eric Jones stood ramrod straight in the front pew, his dark suit a piece of armor against the waves of condolences that felt more like intrusions. His mother, Eleanor Jones, a woman of iron will and impeccable social standing, was gone. Yet Eric felt a cavernous numbness, a chilling echo of the emotional distance she had so carefully cultivated in him. He listened to the eulogy, a curated tapestry of charity galas and board memberships, and recognized the public figure, not the woman who raised him. Then he saw her. Standing near the back, partially obscured by a marble pillar, was Amelia. His Amelia. It had been a year since their divorce was finalized, a year of sterile silence. She looked different, her face softer, her familiar anxiety replaced by a quiet weariness. And then his eyes dropped, and the world tilted on its axis. Beneath her simple black dress was the unmistakable, gentle curve of pregnancy. A cold fire, sharp and acidic, ignited in his gut. Pregnant. While he was burying his mother, she was here, carrying another man's child. The betrayal felt absolute, a final, cruel postscript to their failed marriage. He tore his gaze away, focusing on the stained glass window behind the altar, his knuckles white as he gripped the pew in front of him. But his eyes were traitors, drawn back to her. He saw her sway, one hand flying to her temple, the other protectively cradling her stomach. Her face, already pale, turned ashen. Before anyone could react, her knees buckled. Amelia collapsed onto the cold stone floor in a heap of black fabric, the sound swallowed by the cavernous silence of the cathedral. And in that horrifying moment, the numbness that had encased Eric's heart shattered completely. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital waiting room was a stark contrast to the cloying scent of funeral lilies. Eric paced the polished linoleum floor, the rhythmic click of his expensive shoes the only sound in the tense silence. Each step was a battle between a fury he couldn't contain and a fear he wouldn't acknowledge. Another man's child. The words were a mantra of agony in his mind. Why was she even at the funeral? Was it a final act of defiance? A way to show him how thoroughly she had moved on? The waiting room door swung open, and a woman with fiery red hair and a fiercely protective glare stormed in. Sarah, Amelia's best friend. She had been the maid of honor at their wedding and a silent witness to its decay. "What are you doing here, Eric?" she asked, her voice low and laced with steel. She didn't wait for an answer. "You have no right. She collapsed at my mother's funeral. I brought her here," he clipped out, his tone colder than he intended. "I have every right to know if she's okay." "Oh, now you care," Sarah shot back, her hands on her hips. "Where was all this concern a year ago when you let your mother systematically destroy her? When you listened to every lie, every whisper, and treated her like a hostile takeover instead of your wife?" Eric flinched as if struck. "That's not what happened, isn't it?" She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "You have no idea what she's been through. You have no idea about anything. So you can take your Jones family guilt and your blood money, and you can leave. She doesn't need you." Before he could retort, the door opened again. This time it was his sister, Claire, her face a perfect mask of concerned sorrow, though Eric could see the familiar glint of calculation in her eyes. "Eric, darling, I was so worried," she said, rushing to his side and placing a manicured hand on his arm, completely ignoring Sarah. "I saw the ambulance. Is she—" "They're running tests," Eric said, his jaw tight. Claire's gaze flickered towards Sarah with disdain before settling back on him. "I can't believe she had the nerve to show up. And pregnant of all things. It's just so tacky. After everything Mother said about her, her words were a subtle poison designed to reinforce his narrative of betrayal. He remembered his mother's final words on the subject of Amelia. She was an anchor, son. A beautiful, charming anchor. I'm glad you cut yourself free. At the time, he'd believed her. He'd wanted to believe her. It was easier than admitting his own failure. The timing is certainly something, Eric muttered, the confirmation from his sister solidifying the concrete block of resentment in his chest. A doctor in blue scrubs emerged, his expression neutral. Family of Amelia Hayes. Eric and Sarah stepped forward simultaneously. Sarah shot him a look that could curdle milk. I'm her emergency contact. The doctor nodded at her, but his eyes lingered on Eric, a flicker of recognition for the prominent local family. Ms. Hayes is stable for now. The collapse was due to a combination of stress and a pre-existing medical condition we're trying to get a handle on. It's crucial we get a full family medical history, particularly from the father's side. Is he here? Sarah's face went pale. She looked from the doctor to Eric, a strange, panicked expression on her face. He's not available right now. Eric felt a grim, bitter satisfaction. Of course, the father wasn't here. He was probably some artist or musician, the kind of man Amelia always claimed to admire, the kind of man who wasn't him. But the doctor's words about a pre-existing condition snagged in his mind. Amelia had always been perfectly healthy. He'd never known her to have any serious medical issues. Another lie? Another secret? The chasm between the woman he thought he knew and the woman lying in that hospital bed seemed to widen with every passing second. Eric drove home from the hospital long after midnight, leaving Sarah to her hostile vigil. Claire had offered to stay, her sympathy a suffocating perfume, but he'd needed to be alone. The Jones mansion felt colder and emptier than ever. His mother's presence lingered in the oppressive silence, in the perfect placement of every antique, in the scent of lemon oil and old money. He found himself in his home office, a space he'd once shared with Amelia. She had tried to soften its mahogany and leather severity with a vase of wildflowers or a stack of her art history books, small rebellions he had barely noticed at the time. Now, their absence screamed at him. On autopilot, he unlocked a drawer in his desk, the one he hadn't opened in over a year. Inside was a single photo album, the one she'd left behind. His fingers, hesitant at first, opened the leather cover. There they were, on their honeymoon in Tuscany. Amelia was laughing, her head thrown back, sunlight catching in her hair. He was looking at her, a genuine, unguarded smile on his face, a smile he barely recognized as his own. He remembered that day. They'd gotten lost on a winding country road and ended up at a tiny, family-run vineyard. They'd shared a bottle of Chianti and a plate of cheese, talking for hours about a future that had felt as bright and endless as the Italian sky. He had loved her. A raw, powerful love that terrified him. It was a vulnerability his mother had always warned him against. Love is a liability in our world, Eric. Passion fades. A strong portfolio is forever. The doctor's words echoed in his head. A pre-existing medical condition. Crucial we get a full family medical history. It didn't make sense. They had undergone standard medical checkups before trying to start a family, a process that had ended in frustration and arguments. His mother had insisted on using her own family doctor, a man who had treated the Jones for generations. He'd pronounced them both perfectly healthy. A prickle of unease ran down Eric's spine. He had trusted his mother's judgment implicitly in his business and in his life. He had let her convince him that their inability to conceive was Amelia's fault, a subtle failure, another way she wasn't Jones material. He had let that doubt fester, poisoning the last vestiges of their intimacy. He closed the album, the ghost of their shared laughter mocking him. He was a man who built his empire on data, on seeing patterns others missed, on questioning every assumption. Yet, in his own marriage, he had accepted a single, biased narrative without question. He had outsourced the due diligence on his own heart to his mother. Driven by an impulse he didn't understand, he walked to his mother's study, a room that had always been her sacrosanct domain. It was exactly as she'd left it, organized with meticulous, almost obsessive precision. He sat at her large, ornate desk, the leather of her chair cool against his skin. He powered on her desktop computer, guessing her password, legacy, with a grim sense of predictability. He didn't know what he was looking for. A will, a file, a clue. He clicked through folders labeled charities, investments, household. Then he saw it. A folder tucked away, cryptically named EA Contingency. His initials and hers. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. He clicked it open. The folder was password protected. Of course it was. He tried their anniversary, her birthday, his. Nothing. Then, on a desperate hunch, he typed the name of the genetic condition his own father had died from. A rare cardiac disorder the family never spoke of. The folder opened, and the world as Eric Jones knew it began to dissolve. The hospital room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. Amelia was awake, propped up against a pile of pillows, staring out the window at the grey Boston skyline. She looked fragile. The vibrant energy that had always defined her leached away, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. When Eric entered, her head snapped toward him, her body tensing. The space between them crackled with a year of unspoken words and unresolved pain. "What do you want, Eric?" Her voice was raspy, devoid of its usual warmth. He stopped a few feet from her bed, the flowers he'd impulsively bought feeling foolish and inadequate in his hands. "I wanted to see how you are." A humorless smile touched her lips. "I'm fine. You can go back to your funeral arrangements now." The dismissal stung. He placed the flowers awkwardly on a side table. "Amelia, we need to talk. The doctor said you have a pre-existing condition." He asked about the father's medical history. He let the last words hang in the air, a deliberate, pointed barb. He wanted to hurt her, to make her feel a fraction of the betrayal that was eviscerating him. Her eyes, which once looked at him with such adoration, were now cold, hard shields. "The father is not your concern, isn't he?" Eric stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You show up at my mother's funeral, pregnant, and collapse. You make a spectacle. It becomes my concern." "A spectacle," she whispered, her voice trembling with a sudden, fierce anger. "I came to pay my respects, Eric, because despite everything, she was your mother, and I am not a monster. I thought maybe, for a single morning, we could act like civilized adults. My mistake." She turned her head away, looking back out the window, a clear signal that the conversation was over. But Eric couldn't let it go. The questions were a swarm of hornets in his mind. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick, Amelia? All those years, all those tests. Was it all a lie?" She finally looked at him, and he was shocked to see her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It wasn't the look of a liar caught in a deception. It was the look of someone profoundly wounded. "You believe what you want to believe, Eric," she said, her voice barely audible. "You always have. It's easier that way." The air thickened, heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 similar arguments. Arguments where he had stood on the side of logic and Jones' family pragmatism, and she had stood on the side of an emotion he couldn't or wouldn't understand. He remembered one of their last fights, his mother's insinuations about Amelia's motives fresh in his ears. He'd accused her of not trying hard enough, of not wanting their family as much as he did. The look of utter devastation on her face that night was the same look she was giving him now. A nurse entered, her cheerful demeanor a jarring intrusion. "Time to check your vitals, Miss Hayes." She gave Eric a pointed look. Perhaps the patient could use some rest. It was a clear dismissal. As he backed out of the room, his mind replayed Amelia's words. "You believe what you want to believe. You always have." Was that true? Had he simply accepted the easiest narrative, the one that painted her as the villain and him as the wronged husband? The files on his mother's computer suggested a different story, a darker, more complex one. But his pride, that Joan's inheritance, was a wall of glass between him and the truth. He could see through it, dimly, but he was afraid of what it would take to break it. He walked away from her hospital room, feeling more lost and confused than he had at his own mother's funeral. The fury was still there, but it was now tangled with a thread of terrifying doubt. What if the betrayer in this story wasn't Amelia? What if it was the woman he was mourning? What if it was himself? The password had been cardiomyopathy, the medical term for the genetic heart condition that had claimed his father at 55. The same condition his mother, Eleanor, had always assured him he'd tested negative for as a child. As the folder opened on her computer screen, Eric felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was a crypt of secrets. There were scanned documents, email threads, and invoices from a private investigator. His hands trembled as he clicked on the first file. A report from a genetics lab dated 18 months prior. It was a comprehensive workup on one Amelia Hayes. He scanned the document, his eyes catching on medical jargon he didn't fully understand until he saw the summary. Amelia was a carrier for a rare recessive gene. A gene that, when paired with another carrier, could result in serious complications. His blood ran cold. He opened the next file. It was his own genetic report, one he had never seen before. There, in stark black and white, was the truth he'd been shielded from his entire life. He was also a carrier, for the exact same gene. The room began to spin. It wasn't Amelia who was the problem. It was them. Together. Any child they conceived would have a 1 in 4 chance of inheriting the active, life-threatening condition. His mind flashed back to their fertility struggles. The endless appointments with Dr. Alistair Finch, his mother's doctor. The vague explanations. The subtle blame shifted toward Amelia. It had all been a lie. A carefully constructed, meticulously managed lie. He clicked on another file, an email chain between his mother and Dr. Finch. "Eleanor," the doctor wrote. "The results are conclusive. They are both carriers. To proceed would be irresponsible. We need to inform them of the risks." His mother's reply was swift and chilling. "Alistair, you will do no such thing. This information remains between us. The Jones line does not need the complication of a defective heir. I will handle Amelia." Handle Amelia? The words were like a physical blow. He scrolled further, his heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He found the private investigator's reports. For months, his mother had paid someone to follow his wife. Photos of Amelia having lunch with a male colleague from her landscape design firm, taken from a long lens, framed to look intimate, audio snippets of conversations, edited to sound incriminating. It was a portfolio of fabricated betrayal. He remembered the arguments, the accusations. He had thrown these proofs in Amelia's face, his voice dripping with his mother's poison. He remembered Amelia's desperate denials, her tears, the way she looked at him as if he were a stranger. And he had been. He'd been his mother's puppet. The final document was the most devastating. It was a draft of a legal agreement, a separation proposal offering Amelia a generous but binding settlement. Attached was a note from Eleanor to her lawyer. She must sign an NDA. She cannot know the real reason. Let her think he believes she was unfaithful. It's cleaner that way. He will recover more quickly if he is angry. Cleaner. His mother had shattered their marriage, destroyed the woman he loved, and lied to him about his own genetic legacy, all for a cleaner outcome. She hadn't been protecting him. She had been curating his life, pruning away anything, or anyone, she deemed imperfect. Her love wasn't nurturing. It was a form of quality control. Eric leaned back in the chair, the leather groaning under his weight. He felt hollowed out, the foundations of his life turned to dust. The grief for his mother was gone, replaced by a cold, searing rage. The woman he had mourned this morning was a stranger, a masterful manipulator who had played him, his wife, and their future like pieces on a chessboard. And the baby. Dear God, the baby. It wasn't another man's child. He knew it with a certainty that was as painful as it was absolute. It was his. And it was in danger because of a truth his mother had buried. He grabbed his keys, his mind singular and focused. He had to get back to the hospital. He had to tell her everything. Eric found his sister, Claire, in the main drawing room, directing a catering manager on the final arrangements for the post-funeral reception. She looked up as he entered, a slight frown creasing her brow at his dishevelled appearance. "Eric, there you are. I was just deciding between the salmon blinis or the prosciutto-wrapped figs. What do you think?" He didn't answer. He simply stood in the doorway, the tablet containing the downloaded files from their mother's computer held loosely in his hand. The silence stretched, and Claire's polished smile began to falter. "What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way, I have," he said, his voice gravelly. He walked toward her, placing the tablet on the mahogany coffee table between them. Mother's computer, a folder called EA Contingency. Claire's blood drained from her face. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled in an instant, revealing a raw, panicked fear underneath. She knew. Of course, she knew. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her eyes darting toward the door as if contemplating escape. "Don't lie to me, Claire." Eric's voice was dangerously quiet. "Not anymore. I read it all. The genetic reports, mine and Amelia's, the private investigator, the emails to Dr. Finch. I know what she did." He paused, his gaze boring into her. "What I want to know is, what did you do?" Tears welled in Claire's eyes, the genuine, messy kind she so rarely allowed herself. "She made me," she whispered, sinking onto the silk brocade sofa. "I didn't want to. I told her it was wrong, but you did it anyway," Eric pressed, his voice devoid of sympathy. "You were there. That night I confronted Amelia. You backed her up. You told me you'd seen her with that man, that it looked cozy. You helped her twist the knife." Claire broke, her body shaking with sobs. "She said it was for the best, for the family. She was terrified of you having a sick child, Eric. The way Daddy suffered. She couldn't bear to see you go through that. She couldn't bear the thought of the Jones name being associated with weakness." Each word was a new layer of betrayal. His own sister, the one who had pretended to console him through his divorce, had been a co-conspirator. "Weakness?" he scoffed, the word tasting like ash. "Amelia's strength is something you couldn't possibly comprehend. And that baby, my baby, isn't a weakness. It's my child. And Mother's lies put them both in danger." "I know," she cried, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. When I saw Amelia at the funeral, I felt sick. I knew it was your baby. I wanted to tell you, Eric, I swear I did. But I was scared. Mother, she had this hold on me. On both of us. Eric looked at his sister, weeping amongst the preparations for a party celebrating a liar, and felt nothing but a profound, weary emptiness. He finally saw the truth of their family dynamic. He was the chosen heir, the one to be protected and molded. Claire was the accomplice, forever living in his shadow, desperate for their mother's approval, willing to do anything to get it. Eleanor hadn't just controlled them, she had pitted them against each other, ensuring her own position as the unchallenged matriarch. She told Amelia the lie herself, Claire admitted, her voice muffled by her hands. The day before you two had the final fight, she went to Amelia's studio. She told her that you had confided in her, that you felt trapped and wanted out, but didn't know how to end it. She told Amelia that the kindest thing she could do was give you a reason to leave. The final piece clicked into place. Eleanor had engineered the entire demolition. She had given him the weapon, the faked evidence of infidelity, and she had convinced Amelia to fall on the sword. It was a masterpiece of emotional destruction. "Get them out of here," Eric said, gesturing vaguely at the caterers who were trying to pretend they couldn't hear. "What? The caterers? The guests? Everyone?" "Cancel it," he commanded, his voice regaining its familiar authority. But this time, it was wielded for a different purpose. "The performance is over." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Claire alone with the ruins of their family's legacy, the scent of prosciutto-wrapped figs, and the overwhelming stench of their shared deception. The drive back to the hospital was a blur. Eric's mind was a maelstrom of guilt, rage, and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. He wasn't just mourning the mother he thought he had. He was mourning the man he might have been, the husband he had failed to be, and the year he had lost. A year of his child's life, spent in utero, while he, the father, was living in a cocoon of ignorance, nursing a phantom betrayal. Every memory of the last 2 years was now tainted, refracted through the prism of this new, horrific truth. Her quiet sadness he had interpreted as distance. Her pleas for him to listen he had dismissed as emotional manipulation. Her final, weary surrender he had celebrated as a victory. He had been a fool, a willing pawn in his mother's cruel game. He had prided himself on his intelligence and perception, yet he had failed the most important test of his life. He had failed to trust his own wife. He parked the car but didn't move to get out. He rested his forehead against the cold leather of the steering wheel. The image of Amelia's pale, unconscious form on the cathedral floor flashing in his mind. Her collapse wasn't just stress. It was the physical manifestation of a crisis he should have been there to help her navigate. He was her husband, or he had been. He was the father of her child. It was his duty to protect her, and he had done the opposite. He had actively participated in her persecution. The power imbalance in their relationship, something he had never truly acknowledged, was now glaringly obvious. He had held all the cards, the money, the name, the influence of a formidable mother. Amelia had only had her love for him, and when he had weaponized his distrust, she had been left with nothing. No defense against the combined weight of the Jones empire. He thought of the baby. His baby. A son or a daughter who might carry the same genetic flaw he did. A child who needed a father who was present, honest, and strong enough to defy the toxic legacy of his own upbringing. He couldn't be the man his mother had molded him to be, emotionally detached, ruthless, placing legacy above love. That man was a hollow shell. He had to be better, He finally lifted his head, a grim determination solidifying in his gut. An apology wasn't enough. Words were easy. He had built his life on transactions and negotiations. But this was different. This wasn't a deal to be closed. It was a ruin to be excavated. He had to show her, not just tell her. He had to be willing to sit in the wreckage he helped create, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how long it took. Stepping out of the car, he felt the cool night air on his face. For the first time, he wasn't walking into the hospital as the powerful Eric Jones, demanding answers. He was walking in as a man stripped of his pride, armed with nothing but the devastating truth and a desperate, fragile hope that it wasn't too late to start again. He was going to her not to fix things, but to confess. He found Amelia sitting up in bed, a half-eaten bowl of soup on the tray beside her. Sarah was in the chair next to her, and they both fell silent when he appeared in the doorway. Sarah immediately rose, her body language a human shield. "I thought I told you to leave," she said, her voice sharp. "Sarah, please," Eric said, his voice quiet, holding none of its usual command. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Amelia. "Can I have 5 minutes? Alone?" Amelia studied his face. The anger and accusation that had been there before were gone, replaced by an expression she had never seen on him, a raw, shattered vulnerability. She gave Sarah a slight nod. With a last, warning glare at Eric, Sarah squeezed Amelia's hand and left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Eric stepped forward, holding the tablet. He didn't know where to begin. The truth was so monstrous, so sprawling. "Amelia, I know," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "I know everything." She frowned, confused. "Know what?" "Why you left. Why we fell apart. It wasn't you. It was never you." He set the tablet on her bed, his hand shaking. "My mother. She lied. She orchestrated the whole thing." He stumbled through the explanation, the words tumbling out in a torrent of shame and regret. He told her about the hidden folder, the genetic reports, his own carrier status he never knew about. He told her about the private investigator, the doctored photos, the lies his mother had fed him. He told her what Claire had confessed, that his mother had gone to Amelia, convincing her to be the villain to set him free. As he spoke, Amelia's expression shifted from guarded confusion to wide-eyed disbelief, and finally, to a look of profound, soul-deep sorrow. The secrets she had been forced to carry, the pain she had shouldered alone, were finally being brought into the light. Tears began to stream down her face, silent and steady. They weren't tears of anger, but of a terrible, heart-breaking validation. "She knew," Amelia whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "She knew the baby could be sick." "Yes," Eric said, his own eyes burning. "And she let us think the problem was you. She let me blame you." He sank into the chair Sarah had vacated, the weight of his guilt making it hard to stand. "I am so sorry, Amelia. Sorry isn't even the right word. It's pathetic. What I did, the things I said to you, the way I believed her over you, it was unforgivable. I was a coward. I let her poison me, and I used that poison to kill our marriage. I see that now." He finally looked up at her, ready for her rage, for her to tell him to get out and never come back. He deserved it, but she just sat there, tears tracing paths down her cheeks, her hand resting on her stomach. She was looking at him, truly looking at him, for the first time in a year. She wasn't seeing the millionaire, the corporate titan, or his mother's son. She was seeing the man she had once loved, broken and telling her a truth so painful it had redefined them both. "Why are you telling me this now, Eric?" she asked softly. "Because the lies have to stop," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They almost killed you. They put our child at risk. And because you deserve the truth. You deserved it a year ago." He took a ragged breath. "And because I never stopped loving you, I just let pride and ego and my mother's voice drown out my own heart. And that is a mistake I will regret for the rest of my life." The confession hung in the sterile air of the hospital room, raw and absolute. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness, but a statement of fact. A foundation, perhaps, on which something new and honest could be built, even amidst the ruins. In the days that followed, the hospital became a strange, neutral territory. The raw emotion of Eric's confession gave way to a quiet, fragile truce. Dictated by the urgent needs of their unborn child, they met with a pediatric geneticist, a kind woman who explained the complexities of their shared recessive gene with calm clarity. She laid out the odds, the potential challenges, and the advanced neonatal care their baby would require immediately after birth. During these meetings, Eric saw a different side of Amelia. She was focused, asking sharp, intelligent questions, her notebook filling with medical terms and treatment plans. The weary victim was gone, replaced by a fiercely determined mother-to-be. And he was her partner. For the first time, they were a team, united against a biological threat, not against each other. He made sure she had the best suite in the hospital, ordered food from her favorite restaurants, and handled the mountain of insurance paperwork. These were things his money could do, easy gestures. The hard part was the quiet moments between appointments when they were left alone. "I don't understand why you never told me," he said one afternoon, as they sat in the small, sunlit atrium of the maternity ward. "After my mother confronted you. You could have told me she was lying." Amelia watched a bird land on the window ledge before she answered. "Would you have believed me?" she asked, her question gentle but piercing. "Or would you have believed her? She had proof. She had your complete trust. All I had was my word. It would have just been another fight, Eric. Another ugly, soul-crushing fight. And I was so tired of fighting." She looked at him, her eyes clear. "She told me you felt trapped, that you wanted out. She made it sound like I was doing you a kindness by letting you go." He flinched, the truth of her words hitting him hard. He wouldn't have believed her. Not then. "She gave me an easy way out," he admitted, his voice low. "And I took it." It was these moments of brutal honesty that began to slowly, painstakingly, rebuild the bridge between them. They talked about their marriage, not the ugly end, but the happy beginning. They remembered the small apartment they'd shared before his company took off, the Sunday mornings spent doing crosswords, the stupid jokes only they found funny. They were rediscovering the people they had been before the money and the manipulations had warped them. Sarah remained a wary presence, her skepticism of Eric palpable, but even she couldn't deny the change in him. He was present. He listened. He watched Amelia with a mixture of awe, love, and profound regret. One evening he brought a box into her room. Inside were dozens of books on landscape design and horticulture. "I remembered you wanted to start your own business," he said, his voice hesitant. "Focusing on sustainable native gardens. I thought, maybe you could use the time now to plan." Amelia looked at the books, then at him. It was a gesture that went beyond money. It showed he remembered her dreams, the ones she had put aside when she became Mrs. Jones. "Thank you, Eric," she said softly, a genuine warmth in her voice for the first time. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise of a future together. But it was something. It was a single, new brick laid on a fragile foundation. They were no longer just ex-spouses, bound by a crisis. They were two people, parents-to-be, cautiously learning if the trust that had been so utterly shattered could ever be pieced back together. While a fragile peace was being brokered in the quiet of the hospital, Eric knew he had one final confrontation to face. He called Claire and asked her to meet him at the family lawyer's office. Not his mother's lawyer, but his own. She arrived looking nervous and haggard, the past week having stripped her of her usual polished veneer. She sat opposite him at the long, gleaming conference table, the lawyer a silent presence at its head. "What is this, Eric?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "Are you cutting me out? Is that it?" Eric looked at his sister, and the anger he had felt was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow sadness. He saw her not as a villain, but as another victim of their mother's obsessive control. "No, Claire, I'm not cutting you out," he said calmly. "You're my sister. You're the only family I have left. But things have to change. The lies, the secrets, the games. It all ends today." He slid a folder across the table. "That is a revised charter for the Jones Family Foundation. Mother's vanity project is over. As of today, its sole mission will be funding research and family support for hereditary cardiomyopathy and related genetic disorders. It will be renamed the Eleanor and Amelia Jones Foundation." Claire gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "Amelia, you're putting her name on it." "Her name belongs there more than anyone's," Eric stated, his voice firm. "This is not about erasing Mother's memory. It's about turning her legacy of deceit into one of truth and healing. It's about helping other families avoid what we went through." He leaned forward. "You will have a seat on the board. You're going to help me run it. You're going to come to the hospital, and you are going to apologize to Amelia. Not because I'm forcing you, but because it's the right thing to do. This is your chance, Claire. Your chance to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem." Tears streamed down Claire's face, but for the first time, they seemed to be tears of relief, of release. She nodded, unable to speak. She was being offered not a punishment, but a path toward redemption. He was giving her a chance to repair the damage she had helped cause. Eric's own path to redemption felt longer, more complex. It wasn't just about grand gestures like renaming a foundation. It was in the daily, mundane acts. He learned how to monitor Amelia's blood pressure. He sat through hours of neonatal care classes. He learned to listen, truly listen, not just wait for his turn to speak. He sold his sterile penthouse in the city and bought a house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, not far from the hospital. A house with a large backyard, which he left untouched. For the landscape designer, he told the realtor with a small, hopeful smile. He was dismantling the life his mother had built for him, and was starting to build one of his own, based on different principles. He was discovering that true power wasn't in a boardroom or a stock portfolio. It was in showing up, in being present, in choosing love over legacy. It was a slow, painful, and deeply transformative process. His redemptive arc wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a deliberate daily choice to be a better man than he was the day before. For Amelia, for his child, and finally, for himself. 3 months later, in the quiet, early hours of the morning, Leo James Jones was born. He was small, 6 pounds and 4 ounces, but his cry was startlingly robust. He was rushed immediately to the NICU, a team of specialists ready for him. Eric and Amelia stood side by side, watching through the glass of the incubator as tiny sensors were attached to their son's chest. The hours that followed were the longest of their lives. They barely spoke, communicating instead through shared glances, a comforting hand on an arm, a silent offering of coffee. The wall between them, once a towering monument of betrayal, had been worn down by shared anxiety and a powerful, unifying love for the tiny life they had created. Finally, the head neonatologist, Dr. Ramirez, approached them, a warm, reassuring smile on her face. "He's a fighter," she said. "The preliminary EKG looks promising. He has the genetic marker, but so far, the condition doesn't appear to be expressing itself aggressively. We'll need to monitor him closely for the rest of his life. But right now, you have a healthy baby boy." Relief washed over them so intensely it left them weak. Amelia sagged against Eric, and without thinking, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight as her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. It was the first time they had held each other in over a year. It felt like coming home. Later that day, they were finally able to hold their son. Eric watched as Amelia held Leo against her chest, her fingers tracing the soft line of his jaw, a look of pure, unadulterated love on her face. "He has your eyes," she whispered, looking up at Eric. He reached out, his finger stroking the baby's soft cheek. "He has your strength," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, the past, with all its pain and deceit, seemed to fade into the background. It would always be a part of their story, a landscape of scars that proved what they had survived, but it no longer defined them. Their future was here, small and perfect, sleeping in his mother's arms. Claire came to visit, her apology to Amelia quiet, tearful, and sincere. Amelia accepted it with a grace that amazed Eric. A tentative bond began to form between the two women, forged in the shared, complex legacy of Eleanor Jones. Their new life took shape slowly. Eric moved into the new house, while Amelia and Leo stayed with Sarah for the first few weeks. But he was there every day, changing diapers, learning how to handle a swaddle, and watching Amelia with a love that was deeper and more honest than anything he had felt before. One evening, as he was about to leave, Amelia stopped him. "Stay," she said softly. "For dinner." It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise that their marriage was magically repaired. It was an invitation, a single step onto the new foundation they had so carefully built. As Eric sat at the kitchen table, watching Amelia rock their son, he knew his redemption wasn't complete. It was a lifelong commitment. But looking at his new family, he felt a sense of peace he'd never known. The lies of the past had been shocking, but the truth of this new beginning was even more so. It was real, it was earned, and it was everything. Eric and Amelia's journey reminds us that the deepest betrayals can sometimes come from the ones we're taught to trust the most. Their story is a powerful testament to the fact that it's never too late to uncover the truth, take responsibility for our own blindness, and fight for a second chance. They learned that a true legacy isn't built on wealth or power, but on honesty, resilience, and the courageous choice to rebuild love from the ashes of deceit. Their path forward won't be easy, but with their son Leo as their guiding light, they are finally building a future on their own terms, free from the shadows of the past. What did you think of Eric's transformation? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of redemption and resilience, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a powerful emotional drama, and be sure to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart.